Postcards from a Dying World, the podcast. For more than a decade, I've reviewed over 1,000 books that are mostly science fiction, horror, and bizarro. This feed will feature bonus audio I have produced over the years, as well as a monthly digest of reviews based on what I've read each month, plus the occasional bonus material about my own fiction. Thanks for listening. You were here for Entropy in Bloom, but talking about that short story collection. So if people want to go back and listen to that, that's really good because we got really into the nitty gritty of short stories. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about your brand new novel, The Loop, which I have here. And you obviously probably have like 19 million copies of.
Yeah. I'm sitting on some inventory, yeah.
Right. Especially this year, you can't do conventions and all that. And
yeah.
Right. So
it's all signing book plates this year.
Right.
Which is not the same thing. It's not the same kind of fun as like actually getting to see people and say hey. So
right. Well, and I think in a lot of ways your success in this book is extra special for me for a lot of reasons. But for one thing is that we kind of grew up like on parallel tracks because we're about the same age and we both grew up reading Fangoria, obsessed with John Carpenter movies. Yep. And writing really bad attempts at short stories that we wanted to turn into novels someday.
Yep.
So tell me, and growing up in a small town. So, yeah. And so we got all that going in common and punk rock.
Well, and yeah, I made it 18 months straight edge, which is not close to your record, but is a long time for a person in their, late teens, early 20s. So
it's not pretty good. 31 years, but Yeah,
you got me beat on the pure metrics. Yeah, if you count by numbers, you got me beat. Yeah, right. Sure.
But The Loop is, and I saw you posted a picture, somebody sent you a picture of The Loop in the wild from a Barnes and Nobles in Louisville. And first of all, it's in camera shot with all the Kuntz and King books because you have J privilege.
Yeah.
But tell me about the feeling of that before we get into the nitty gritty of writing this.
It was, I was kind of in shock at first. I mean, I was in Barnes and Noble with Entropy and Bloom, but it's back before there was this kind of horror renaissance, right? And so I was in science fiction. So I was by Robert Jordan and N.K. Jemisin, which is just, excellent writers, just not my vibe, right? Not exactly what Entropy and Bloom was doing. So the fact that my first official proper novel through a big five publisher is sitting there at the same time the horror revival has kind of happened and there's a horror section again, instead of horror just being, dispersed into all the different little areas wherever they think they can sneak it. Just felt awesome. Like it felt like, aside from everything else that's terrible this year, it felt like a rad part of 2020. the horror is on the rise and that I finally had a book out. So, and then just seeing it in that company too, seeing some of those pictures and seeing it next to authors that I grew up reading, that feels awesome. Yeah.
Well, and speaking of company, I mean, this year, it's not just that horror's got a shelf again, it's that the quality and the caliber of the releases this year is insane. In most years, and I'm not, this might sound like a jerk move to say this, but in most years, this book might be my number one. Yeah. It's also the same year that the only.
No, this is crazy. Yeah. Like yeah. I already put it out there publicly. Like the Only Good Indians is going to win the Stoker and the Shirley Jackson Award. And I wouldn't be surprised, if it doesn't pick up some other, even on the literary front, doesn't see some recognition. So just a phenomenal novel and a breakthrough for Stephen and somebody who's put in the work. I mean, you want to talk about a craftsman who's done the 10,000 hours at their desk. Jones writes incessantly. So really cool to see that pay off for him. And just, there's been a bunch of other heavyweights, coming out at the same time as a new Mallerman, new Max Brooks, new Tremblay that's also about the pandemic. I kind of see Survivor Song and The Loop as kind of separated at birth twins. Like they definitely both do the pandemic horror thing. Mine's just a little more.
Well, and the pacing. Yeah, and the pacing of both books is very similar. There's like a kinship in that too, and we'll get into that when we get into the structure of writing it. But what's interesting to me too about this year and everything, and I would add Mexican Gothic,
Yeah.
Sylvia Marina Garcia is a great one too. Just an incredible year for horror, and it's really great to see. And in a weird way too, because in many ways, like Skullcrack City is like more my jam,
Yeah.
right? Than the Loop,
Yeah.
because it's got the mind fuckery and and you know that going on. But one of the things that I think is really gratifying as your friend, as somebody who's watched you come up in this, is that the Loop is a very assured novel. It's very, even though I might personally like Skullcrack City a little bit more, the Loop is just a really assured and solid piece of writing. That is probably better. This is not quite as much my thing as Skullcrack. Right. I'm just being honest, but I'm so impressed with just how solid it is and how rock solid it is. So we'll get into that.
Cool.
That too. But yeah, this year the company. I mean, when you look at the Goodreads Choice Awards nominations came out today, and just looking at that list of books, like altogether, it's phenomenal. And science fiction has some solid ones this year too. M.K. Jemison's The City We Became, and I haven't gotten to the new Kim Stanley Robinson, but it looks amazing too. So it's just yes, this year has sucked for many things, but books.
The books. It's been a great time for the books.
Yeah, which is good because a lot of us are home a lot. So
yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah. It's become an essential survival tool, in my opinion. I know streaming's way up. And Disney Plus hit their 50 million they were gunning for. But it's nice that books have seen, certain genres of books have seen a renaissance during this too. Not like travel guides are way down. I read that yesterday.
Exactly.
The travel guide sector has been hard hit, but like gardening books are way up. Right. There's different realms in which things have been solid. And that's important to me because for booksellers and small presses and even stores like Powell's and stuff that were so hard hit at the very beginning of this, that there was enough happening in online ordering that they were able to bring back 100 of their staff is really heartening.
Yeah, totally.
That's a bummer when that's a bunch of people and they're out of work, and then all of a sudden people are like, no, we really want books. We want so many books. We need you guys to come ship to us all day,
So I'm really glad that you brought up travel guides, because it was obviously a smart move for you to cancel your travel guide project.
Yeah.
To write the Loop, right?
Yeah, I had to shift gears big time.
Switch gears. Yeah, and so the Loop obviously was one that I think you've been hatching it for a while, or at least it seems like it. And were there multiple projects that you were considering, and this is one that you chose, or is this been the primary one in your site for a while?
This was always out there kind of in the hopper from 2014, because my agent had contacted me and she said, hey, did you ever consider doing a YA horror? She said that it's kind of this burgeoning genre, and she had seen some good sales in that market. And I thought to myself, I was like, I'm always interested in experiment, especially in my short fiction. It was always about trying out a new form or trying a new technique. To me, that experimentation is part of what makes it compelling if I have to sit there for hours doing it. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to take a look at what the restrictions are and see what I can get away with, and try and write something that is kind of from that perspective. But then in the background, in the meantime, Skullcrack City somehow took off. It just completely took off and became this commercial thing that we thought was going to be just a totally divisive book, and this avant-garde thing that was going to pop up in the underground and have some ardent fans and also be very hated. And instead, it was like kind of roundly successful, and we had enough people contacting us saying they wanted more of that my agent called me up and she said, never mind the YA thing, do whatever you do. And so I already had all that kind of research and the beginnings of a story I wanted to tell. And I thought to myself, well, I still like the idea of telling a coming of age story and telling a story about these kinds of conflict and an invasion, riff on Invasion of the Body Snatchers and Shivers and all that. And so I just kind of went for it.
Because when you were talking about it, I was like, this is your attempt at YA, because there's
well, yeah, it was. So there's YA elements in it, right? There's
teenagers, but they're not the Stranger Thing kids.
Right. They're a lot closer to like Carrie for us was YA, right? You're growing up in the 80s. Yeah. Like the closest thing you got to teen fiction was, It, Carrie. That was our YA. And so to me, this is more akin to that. It's just like, horror that happens to have, youthful protagonists at the center.
Well, and you and I are both people who, and we've talked about this many times before, we both were reading way ahead of when we should have been,
or just the right time, like depending on
the perfect time. Yeah. Depending on how you look at it. But I still have my copy of the Stand that has a note, "Do social studies report."
Yeah, perfect.
Inside the cover. That's a pretty beaten up version of the Stand, but and I don't know if I ever did finish that social studies report. I'm assuming I did, but
you finished the Stand. That's the important part.
For my life, it was a little bit more important. I would say. But yeah, I mean, so I mean, I think this book could appeal to teenagers and to all that, but it's interesting because like the success of Skullcrack City and like the fact that people were into how bizarre and how weird it was made it just fine to go bonkers again, right? I mean, yeah.
That was the essence of it. It was kind of just all of a sudden I was granted, permission by the marketplace to try and sell what I already do. The danger there being, it wasn't written to a market. I just went in again trying to do what I do, and then luckily my agent accepted it. She was the one that told me Skullcrack City is a little too crazy for the broader marketplace, and you're better off, putting this out in the small press and building your platform. So she's had work of mine before where she's like, this is this is beyond the pale. Right. But she had enough faith in this one to try and put it out there, and so far so good.
Yeah, and it seems to be, working to plan. I mean, and there are ways you could have gone with, we've certainly seen authors do, like Laird Barron doing the crime fiction, which is, a lot more restrained, I guess.
By Laird terms, it's still very weird crime fiction.
And
compared to the old Leaf stuff,
I personally prefer, and I've told Laird this, I personally prefer his crime trilogy, and of course it gets more bonkers if you read all three books, but
right,
I actually think that the first book and the limitations of not doing supernatural was a benefit for him, because I think it honed a lot of strengths that made when the books got weirder later. Better, much in the same way that I think doing some of your dad horror that you do probably, I think honed your ability to focus in on a lot of those characterizations that come out of like delving into those new adult fears that you have, in Sleep of Judges and In the River, and like, and doing that. Do you think that doing those dad horror pieces, when you came back to something that's like more body horror and insane, like helped? It seemed to me that it did.
No, it definitely did, and thank you, because that was something I was concerned with from the get-go. Because it was, both In the River and Sleep of Judges were much more character-based pieces, and they were, for me, my attempt to, Sleep of Judges, I've always said, was my attempt to merge like Paul Tremblay-esque dad horror with the uncertainty of a Brian Evanson story. Those were two guys I was really vibing on their work at the time, and I was like, what if I could merge the kind of the easy connection you get with telling of a family at risk story, and that kind of relatability. But then I also merged in this kind of cosmic dread and the unknown, you know, from what I got from like a lot of Evison shorts. And then ended up also spending a lot of time just, you know, almost doing kind of a literary take on the characters, and even more so with In the River. That's like a very restrained piece of work for me. Like there are no swear words, there are no jokes. There are, it's got a specific syntax that I developed just for the story. And so, yeah, doing both of those, I felt like I was bringing some new tools to the loop, especially as far as characterization, and trying to root everybody in Lucy so they're really along for the ride with her, and from her perspective the entire time. You know, I think that taught me how to attempt to do that. You know,
right, and I think it's paid off. Sleep of Judges, in particular, really worked very well for me. And I think we talked about that at length the last time I interviewed you. But I think with the loop, one of the things that that felt really good for me as somebody who's like read all of your work was that, and I admit this, that in the months leading up to this, I thought we were going to get kind of a watered down version. You know, and I was very pleasantly surprised that in no way,
yeah,
you know,
this one's a trapdoor. I got a new review today where somebody pointed out, like, they were like, for those concerned that entering the mainstream marketplace has diluted what Johnson does, like, do not worry. But it's a trapdoor. I like that term. I think Chris Sacknesson was the one that told me that, like, you know, a story where it's rooted in the familiar from the beginning, you know, and you have these regular tropes. You have your, you know, outbreak, body snatcher, small town, coming of age, romance stuff. And then somewhere around the 50% point, it escalates. And then somewhere around the 75% point, it goes full bonkers, you know? And I think, so people can feel a little bit comfortable and familiar with like those horror tropes and traditional storytelling at the beginning, but then I still go to the places I like to go by the time it's over, you know, and to the places I really have fun writing. So.
And it's not just the parasites and the icky like paranoia that would drive someone like you to you know, MD, you know, medical websites to look at things, you know, and all those things that I expect. Those are things too, but it's the humor, it's the like kind of like sometimes I think with your work too, and you know, I think it's one of the things that we both like about Cody Goodfellow's work too, is that sometimes there's just sentences that might not make everyone laugh, but make me laugh, right? Yeah. I'm not sure I can pull an example right now, but like those are things that, you know, I was glad to see were still a part of the loop. And I think that I think there's definitely in jokes for people who are more attuned to the genre, you know, and those things you know, and not in a heavy-handed way, but just in a way that I was glad to see. And I felt like a jerk for not trusting you from the beginning for that, but you know, I've seen it happen to lesser, you know, to some writers I never thought it would happen to, you know, and
which editor gets a hold of you, you know.
Right. And but yeah, so, and you guys, I know you share an editor with Stephen Graham Jones, so this editor, I don't know if it's
Joe Monty.
Wow, he had his hands on two really amazing books this year. So this is probably more editing than you've ever gotten before. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that eventually. Let's come back to that. Let's start with where you came to structure this story. And you said you set up a trap door from the beginning. Was that always the plan, to have the trap door set up?
No, I thought I was going to get into things a lot faster. As far as the conflict, I knew I wanted this to be high conflict. I wanted to have each chapter kind of pull you through and whip you around. Because another thing I wanted to do with this, I've been saying it a lot, but I kind of wanted to do a splatterpunk version of a Michael Crichton novel. So I wanted it to be really propulsive, and have a lot of the elements of, when I think about books that kept me up super late at night, as a kid, I wanted it to have that kind of energy. But in the interest of developing character, I actually ended up spending a lot more of the front end, probably the first a novella length at the beginning, first 20,000 words, in trying to actually say, wait a minute, before this goes to chaos, get to know Lucy and her past and her town. Because I realized if I didn't root people in Lucy properly, they wouldn't care about everything that happened after that. It would just be horror action, and there you go. And the bigger stuff I wanted to build to at the end would have less resonance.
Yeah.
And so, it was important to me to come into it. I wanted to come into it with almost a faster pace, but I got really into also learning about Lucy, as I was writing it. So,
which gave it, and I know marketing departments want us to say Stranger Things, but that gave us the Breakfast Club vibe that for me, which is, the kind of the class and social divisions and the kind of people kind of forced in this situation by this cave party. I'm assuming by that scene that there were cave parties you went to in Bend.
Yeah.
I guess we had limestone quarries in Indiana that we went swimming in, but kind of similar thing. But the geographies provide for the teens, and but so I think you did a really good job of setting up the characters. Lucy and Bucket in particular are really interesting characters, and propel the story in the beginning because we don't have the Michael Crichton kind of insanity yet, but we have characters to hook on to that are interesting that we want to know about. And I think that, it's that whole adage, you got to care to scare, kind of thing. And so that was important. I feel, and you did that. Now, it's funny because I don't think a lot of people are picking up on the Crichton vibe, and I kind of feel crappy for not catching on to that myself too.
It happens about it really amplifies it about the 50% point when Steve is introduced, the guy that worked at Imtech.
Hey, maybe you just needed more climate change denial, and people catch on to that,
But since I felt it was important for the first half that Lucy and her friends have no idea what's going on, there weren't enough early opportunities to introduce a scientist for an info dump. I had to wait until later to kind of get that down and inform it. I wanted them to be encountering the pure unknown for quite some time.
Well, and I think of there was a lot of made for TV horror movies in the early 80s, and it always cracked me up that there was a neighborhood occult expert.
Who was that guy? I never knew that guy.
Yeah, there was one that Wes Craven directed where they literally said, "Oh, that's blah blah. He's our neighborhood occult expert," and thankfully, we know better now than to not do.
Awfully convenient, yeah.
Yeah, and for that reason, you had to kind of keep them in the dark. But I think it's fine. That I think it works really, really well, actually, in the sense that I was hooked into the characters, and I think it gives people a sense of. It makes things more shocking when the first. I think Bucket gets bit, by the woman that he was crushing on, and she won't let go, right? And that first, I was like, "Whoa, he's really getting hurt, very badly now." And that level and that intensity was something I didn't expect to happen that quickly to a character who was that important to the first quarter of the book. And I really liked that. That kind of shift, because for me that was a decision that kind of took me back because I didn't expect that. So was that on purpose? Was that a conscious choice in how you were setting up the narrative to move?
Yeah, no, it was intentional. Just I always think it's good to, especially if people are in that comfort zone too. Like I said, there is a lot of that first half that's you kind of have a sense of, okay, I know this mode of storytelling. To kind of set a shot across the bow and say, this isn't necessarily as safe as you're used to, you know. Basically, you know, whenever you do that, you worry about it because you also worry that people will become attached to the characters and they want that character to be on the ride with them, you know, and that you can push them away. So it's a kind of it's a hard edge to ride, but I think it's important to have situations. I think about two of my favorite story flips of all time. One happens in Jack Ketchum's Off Season, and another happens in James Ellroy's The Big Nowhere. And both of them spend massive amounts of the book introducing and getting deeply into the mindset of a character who proves to not even make it halfway through the narrative. And when that happened both times, I was completely shocked, but also thrilled because all of a sudden I realized, like, this story could be any story. It could be, this is anybody's game. And so, yeah, having a little bit of that built into it, I thought it's something that I like in the fiction I read. So I thought it would be cool, you know?
Well, it took me a couple of the Repairman Jack books to realize that absolutely anyone besides Jack was in mortal danger at all times.
Yeah.
When F. Paul Wilson was writing those books, and he had one where, and I'm sorry for the spoiler for anyone who doesn't get there, but there's one, I won't say which one, but one of them is his dad gets like killed in the first chapter of the book, and you're just like, because they were setting up the whole book to be this father and son trip and this whole thing, and then he kills the dad, and he was like, but he had a situation where no matter what, Jack had to go through all the stories, so everybody else was.
There's only one bulletproof character there. Yeah.
yeah. And so, like, I really appreciated and liked that that Lucy, like, it felt more dangerous to her too, you know, that she could go through this. So tell me a little bit more about developing Lucy.
Well, initially it was, I found Lucy in a vision, right? Like I said, writing these other two, like, very personal stories, with Sleep of Judges and In the River, I basically had kind of used up a lot of my mojo just as a storyteller. I'd put so much into those books and they were so personal. And I was fried out, but I was scheduled to go, you know, a week later and do another 3 days in a hotel and start work on The Loop, which at the time was called Exit Human, which they thought was too much like a Philip K. Dick title, which is why it's The Loop now, which is funny. But
and I was just thinking, I like Exit Human, but
I love that title, but it does kind of have a hard sci-fi ring to it, right? And I get where they're coming from with that. But
I don't know, like, one thing we've learned through doing the Dickheads podcast is that Philip K. Dick always had the worst title possible.
Yeah.
Like, every single book had a terrible title before the editors got into
we're like,
it.
hey, buddy.
Well, you know, the original title for Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep was The Killers Are Among Us, said the special man, or something like that.
Sounds awesome.
So yeah, like Rick Decker, The Killers Are Among Us, said the special man, is literally the first title that he had for it.
So. Yeah, well, then maybe Flow My Tears was an actual one, right? Like, he got that one through.
Yeah. But anyways, Lucy.
Yeah. So I was basically closest I've ever been to a writer's block, and knowing I was supposed to head into a hotel and generate 20,000 words the next weekend, which is what I normally try to do. And so my wife got me a gift certificate for this place here out in Southeast called Float On. That's a sensory deprivation tank. And I went, I did a float, and basically like 45 minutes in, had a vision of all these stars swirling, and they came together, and it spelled her name. It said Lucia. And I was like, well, I guess that's the answer. Like, that's my through line for this novel, is this young woman named Lucia. And then from there, just kind of developed her around, you know, everybody in this book. It's a coming of age thing, but it's also my, like, small processing growing up in a small town, being a weird kid novel, right? Like, everybody's got one of those in them too, whether it's a memoir or fictionalized.
I'm editing one right now.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. So everybody's got one of them. So this was mine, and yeah, there are a ton of people that are kind of amalgams of people I grew up with, and so Lucy's based on a lot of different people I knew growing up. As is Brewer and Bucket, and even all the jerks, right? They've people from Bend have been writing me saying, "Hey, did you really see so and so kick a cat to death? Like, which one?" Because people were that grew up around the same time as me. They kind of know a lot of the narratives from my town, and so they're kind of
at
able
least
to know
they're reading the book,
where story elements came from. Yeah, and so no, everybody's names have been changed just enough that if I ever get to do a reading in Bend, I'm not going to get jumped or sued. So,
but they're reading the book because they're picking up on this stuff. But yeah, so Lucy being an immigrant in a way because she was adopted here.
yeah.
Made her a very interesting character and made her somebody that instantly makes her a little bit more interesting than just like your average Bend teenager,
Yeah.
and her and Bucket both. So I thought that was a really smart decision. And once you had, because Lucia came to you in the float, but then Bucket, did you want to give her somebody that she could relate to, or
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted her to have a friend who I wanted two best friends that spoke their own language. Like there's certain people you're growing up with, and it's almost like you have this form of communication that's yours and yours alone. There's like that really special bond you have with somebody who you feel like you are surviving with. If there's one person you attach to when you're a kid, and you're like, okay, I understand where you're coming from, you understand where I'm coming from, and this is how we get through this experience together. I wanted them to have that and for that to be special. So I thought, if he also was an outcast in the same way that she was, that it was not just, class-based, but being people of color in a tiny, white tourist town, that would be another thing that would unite them and give them their own understanding of each other that nobody else would quite have. So that was kind of where he came from.
And some people might be like kind of annoyed with me that I'm focusing so much on them, but I think one of the things that's interesting is that, as speaking as somebody who's read I think all of your work, at least all your published work, but at this point, like one of the things that's really interesting for me is that it's not the half technology, half monster, weird hybrid things that I'm thinking about a week after reading The Loop. The things that I've been coming back to is how much the characterizations works towards making the second half of the book function better. And I think in this particular novel, the thing that I kept thinking about when, because just the reason I write reviews and the reason why I do this podcast is I'm trying to grow as a writer by not just reading books, but trying to consume them and learn from them.
Yeah.
And so, and I know you do that too, because you told a great story on your Powell's interview about reading Evanson and finding all the maybes in it.
Yeah.
It was interesting because now I'm looking for them. But
a lot of perhaps too. Yeah, maybe, perhaps.
Right. But
stuff ending a lot of question marks.
But for me, the thing that I really just kept thinking about when I kept thinking about The Loop and trying to put this through my grinder to what function and what worked about this is that, and it's not rocket science. It's not anything that we haven't known all along or for years, but the establishment of Lucy as a character is so primary to what functions when shit goes bananas in the second half of the book. And I think that if she wasn't such a strong character that we, somewhat feel uncomfortable for, we definitely like feel sorry for her in this high school that she doesn't fit in, and then all these things, that it makes it so much more meaningful when her best friend is first bit and then and then taken away from her. And then the importance of the loss of Bucket in this story to me is the crux of which the book hangs on,
Yeah.
And for me, I've been looking for those cruxes and those hinges this year, when I've been reading. And for example, like Mallory, there's one conversation that happens on the train in Mallory that the whole book hinges on. And it's not the action scenes, it's not it's all that. And Josh confirmed to me that he thought I was onto something, saying that hinged on it. And to me, the thing that this book hinges on, even though Bucket is lost, is that relationship with them is like one of the things that kind of just fuels it, because that's such a gut punch for Lucy. And then she becomes the person who will put the axe in people later. But I don't know that if she hadn't gone through that, then she doesn't become the hero of the second half, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the literal midpoint of the book, as far as word count goes. Like right there, that's the hinge, you know, and it's the setup for, you know, all the revelation and then the escalating action, you know, and there's kind of many versions of those escalations up to that point, but then things really explode, and there's at the crux of that, it's what drives her different personalities, these different versions of Lucy that she feels she has had to be in different social settings and different worlds. It's part of what furthers that divide within her, and kind of it's also, like you said, it's that act of atrocity that pushes her kind of beyond the mode that she knew she would ever exist in. All of a sudden, you know, she has PTSD, she's known trauma, but this finally takes her beyond the pale to where she has to decide, which person am I going to be? What human being am I after all of this atrocity, and what has meaning in my life? And can I connect with other human beings? And you know, why couldn't I before? And yeah, it's a really central part of that, you know, and it's kind of sets up her challenge of, you know, what does Brewer mean to her? What does it mean to continue living on in the face of tragedy? And what do we have together as humans that would be worth fighting for, you know? So I feel like that's also, it's the part where people stop midway through the book and send me messages to yell at me. Like, what did you do? So that's been interesting. It's like one of the big Goodreads stop points, which I always, you know, you can kind of analyze those. You can figure out, okay, here's where maybe I was a little too slow at the beginning. Here's where people get upset. Here's where people start saying, what the fuck, you know, which is the latter 70 to 100, you know.
Well, and by having her parents having died in the mine accident also is the kind of Shane Blackian setup, you know, with the, you know, because Shane Black always has like some kind of thing early on that, you know, is going to pay off later. And so like the parallel of the trauma that her parents didn't survive, and then, you know, she's got to get through. I'm sorry, it's dog eating time here, so that will be a little bit of barking. I'll be trying to mute whenever you're talking. But at this point in the book, it seems like once, you know, we get this payoff that she has to try and survive this trauma that her parents couldn't. And I don't know if that's a parallel you set up intentionally or if it was accidental, but it's take credit.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, it's an accident that I'll claim was intentional. Stuff just echoes, right? Sometimes you accidentally get something right. So no,
yeah. And but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just definitely really appreciated that aspect of it. So once things got bonkers, how much of this was research, and where did this all come from? Like once the stuff goes crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I love doing my research. So I had all kinds of FCC and FDA documentation for communications devices and biotech implants, and for whatever reason, I like getting into the government documentation because it has a tendency to use such obtuse, like hierarchical jargon language that it makes stuff feel alien and weird. And so when I'm researching something, I like to go to whatever the like government documents related to that process are. And so, yeah, there was a lot of research about biotech devices, and then a lot of research about certain animal. I don't know, for whatever reason, people aren't spoiling one of the later twists about the biotech. So I've been trying not to do that also, but
we're doing spoilers, and there's going to be a spoiler warning from the beginning.
Oh, okay. Well, so yeah, I read a lot about the octopus, obviously. You know, that was I find them to be completely fascinating creatures, and I think given all the properties inherent to them, that they do make a kind of a very viable like biotech subject. And so there was a lot of research into that, and also just kind of conspiracy mindsets, and you know, what drives conspiracy-based thinking and stuff like that. And so, yeah, there was a ton of research that went into the science fiction aspect of it that becomes prominent later in the book, which I love doing that stuff, you know.
Yeah, and you are well known for your research, for sure, and I think that it pays off, definitely in the back half of this book, for sure. And like I said, I feel kind of silly that I didn't catch on to the Crichton comparison, and
I probably just didn't do it that well, you know. If you didn't pick it up, maybe it wasn't there, but it was part of what guided me through it, you know.
Well, Crichton's kind of people don't read Crichton like they used to, you know. Like I don't think, and for what I do think it's the climate change denial and some of the weird shit he got into at the end, that people aren't hero-fying him anymore. It's kind of like the Dan Simmons thing where, like, you know, you don't have as many people pushing like go back and read Carrying Comfort now because they're like, he's kind of sketchy. And and so I think for that, you know, it's like, for example, Philip K. Dick will always have people like me who are evangelical about him and trying to spread the word, but I don't know if Crichton has that, you know, but I don't know.
Well, and they even tried to revive him now, too. I saw they were pulling the same thing they did with Ludlum, where they have other thriller writers. Somebody did a new Andromeda strain, I guess.
Yeah, you know, a friend of mine had the guy, because he's from Portland, who wrote I think it's Daniel Wilson, the guy who wrote the
Robo-Apocalypse guy.
Yeah. I listened to an interview with him where he was talking about getting into the Crichton voice, and it was interesting, you know, hearing him talk about that. I'm not big enough of a fan of Andromeda Strain to run out and get it, but I mean, I read Crichton a little bit when I was growing up, but for whatever reason, he didn't connect to me, you know, like some do. So that might be another reason why I didn't catch on to it. But I really do, you know, but it's funny because another kind of similar thing too, but not really. But you know, John Shirley had Crawlers, which had like mechanical spiders that were going around killing people, and obviously not the same thing, but you know, kind of in the same wheelhouse of like the small town and all that. And so I did appreciate that too, because that was my first John Shirley book, actually, was Crawlers. So so there were a few comparisons there too, but one of the things that I really liked in the back half is that once you did get to that halfway point, and once it did get going, that's when you got into the pacing that reminded me of Survivor Song, where it was just really unrelenting once you got to that point. In a weird way, what I felt like it was is like, because what you're talking about is like a biotech type thing getting unleashed, right? So it's almost like a barrel got dumped out and it's all like pouring down a hill. And so that's kind of how I kind of saw the pace of the book, is that it's almost like a spill that's like spreading out and going down, and you can't stop it, right? And I really liked how the pace felt organic that way. What are some things that you did to try and make sure that you kept that pace going? My book Ring of Fire, I tried to do a similar thing with once the action started, just having the pace going really, you know, fast. So I know the things I did. I'm kind of interested to hear what you did to move that pace along that way.
I think at that point, I just you know, the chapters got shorter. People were doing less thinking and more doing, because at that point they were in, you know, it became primal. You know, it wasn't about psychologically surviving, it was about physically surviving. And so rooting it more in the physicality of that. I mean, even in an earlier, you know, there's like a car chase earlier in the book, but it's almost still a psychological experience for Lucy. It's more about Lucy's perception of the car chase and her coming to understand the new world that's around her. So yeah, the first half, there's that trickle effect. I really like that description of the barrel tipped over, and there's just those little streams of information where, you know, small things are happening in the background, which is something I thought, like the Kaufman, like the 70s Invasion of the Body Snatchers. In the first third of that, there's just so many little tiny brilliant moments that let you know something is off, but they're never, you know, accompanied by a big audio stab or anything. It's just like things are wrong, you know? And so that my hope was to kind of have it be that until it was a full on, you know, fight for survival. And at that point, you know, when they're all in that music shop together, the exchange, I also just really wanted to do something that was an homage to, I wanted it to feel like it was kind of The Thing and Assault on Precinct 13 at the same time. So there's this threat on the outside, but there's also this threat on the inside. And to see kind of how I could merge those two things to, you know, cause the tension to rise. And then after that, it happened really organically. I mean, the big last chunk of that I wrote across probably 2 weeks, just writing nonstop. And it felt urgent to me, like everything that was happening. And also, you know, I started with a lot of characters, and then when you realize you're to the point where characters are going to start dying, it's almost like that becomes the trigger for these plot points as we winnow away down to our, you know, final girl or whatever the final conflict's going to be. It's almost like that, knowing you have so many characters who aren't going to make it gives you its own form of guidance. It's weird, you know.
Right. Well, and then in the pacing in that regard, kind of takes on a different. I know with the characters, like you kind of have to have a rhythm when you're spacing out all the different characters, and then that rhythm has to change. It's almost like a song speeding up when you decrease. I'm sorry about the
worries.
dog. But you know, when you lose characters, you have to pick up the pace anyways. Was it always intentional to have a quick pace?
It was always my hope, you know. Like I said, if I would have pulled off what I had in my head, the first half would be just as half as the second. But once I got into it, I really, you know, my literary instincts kicked in, and I really wanted to make it more of a character-centered piece. I felt like in Skullcrack City, I got into Doyle to a degree, but I still feel like that's a book that's dominated by plot and dominated by ideas, you know, which is always a criticism like early Cronenberg got. You know, they were like, this is more a concept, a fascinating concept, than it is a story about human beings, you know. And so it was almost in a response to Skullcrack City, was to say, what if I could still have, you know, a pretty vibrant, wild plot, but also make it a more personal character study. And in trying to do that, you know, it kind of altered the pathway into it. Yeah.
Just on a side note, since you mentioned Cronenberg, where do you think? I think it was The Fly where Cronenberg learned to do humans.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Because you look at, like, I mean, even before that, they feel like people being positioned to express ideas. Like there's some of the stuff in Scanners that feels a little more naturalistic and a little more character based. But man, yeah, no, you look at Shivers and Rabid and The Brood and Scanners. Even Videodrome feels like an exploration of ideas more so. In a way that I love. I mean, that's something that totally lights me up as a film goer. But The Fly is the one where that central romance and kind of the horror of watching Jeff Goldblum disintegrate was it just made it all feel more organic and more human, even though his weird obsessions were still clearly on display. You know, there's a lot of cold metal, a lot of weird shapes, a lot of body horror. But since the biggest part of the horror of it was their relationship falling apart as his body fell apart. I think that's what made that feel different, you know?
Yeah, I didn't mean to ask about Cronenberg. I don't know how that happened, but
yeah, I never asked questions about that guy.
This was supposed to be about the loop. Yeah. But you know, that's the thing is like we've also your fans or the people that read you are picking up on the Cronenberg influence, even though that's not really being marketed that way. But you know, obviously Cronenberg has had a huge influence on this book in particular. What do you think are the strongest ways that Cronenberg influenced this particular book?
I mean, I think conceptually, when we're talking about an outbreak that takes away impulse control, that's Shivers. You know, it's even more Shivers than it is, say, 28 Days Later or something like that. You know, we're talking about being infected by something that makes the worst in us come out.
A little bit of Rabid too. A little bit of Rabid.
Yeah, there's a smidge of Rabid. I was never crazy about Rabid, but yeah, there's some of that there with the way it moves around.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, and then also there's some stuff that happens, you know, in the final stretch that's very almost visually inspired by Cronenberg, in that sense of invasiveness and that sense of eruption and that sense of mutation. And then somebody else pointed out there's like more Fulci than they were expecting. I didn't realize until somebody pointed out how much eye gore there is. There's a lot of eye trauma in this book, and I didn't see it at the time until somebody pointed it out. But yeah, the filmic influences on the book are pretty. I wear my influences on my sleeve, you know, so they're pretty out there. I just try to make it my voice riffing on that stuff that I love, you know, so it doesn't come across as you know, stealing. So it comes across as homage, you know.
All right, so we're coming close to the end here. So just between you, me, and the internet,
yeah,
you know, but I mean, they have to make it this far. So what part of the marketing annoys you more, the Stranger Things comparison or the World War Z comparison?
You know, it's weird because they're putting Stranger Things on everything right now. They just are, you know, it's that kind of, it's a dominant concept in the marketplace that people are attracted to. And if you have kids in a small town fighting against the source of evil that comes from a lab, you're going to get hit with Stranger Things. I initially pitched it to them as Shivers meets Dazed Confused, because, you know, it was a lot more of like these people right at the edge of graduation, wandering around town talking, and there just happens to be this massive biotech outbreak. The World War Z one is it's a little bit rougher. I almost wish they would have said 28 Days Later or something like that as far as outbreak goes, or as far as trying to say zombie without saying zombie goes. Because World War Z, sometimes people are expecting it to be told in the style of World War Z, right? And they're expecting it.
Exactly.
Right. And so now they're coming in and they're like, well, this is going to have little kids riding around on bikes. It's going to have a supernatural threat. And it's going to be, you know, told from all these different narrative voices. That's what that actual merger would be. But I guess what they kind of do in New York is they just take the two most popular terms that can even vaguely apply to the book and slap them together. So I don't know. It's brought people to the book that otherwise might not have found it. Not all of them are super excited about how fucked up and weird it is. But there's also some people who, you know, maybe found it as an impulse thing because they like Stranger Things and found out they like something new. So that's what I'm crossing my fingers is happening. Yeah.
Is very angry dog here right now while you were talking, but he really did not like the World War Z comparison. He was like looking for government reports in the novel and was very upset that there was only the talk radio guy.
Well, there is that guy though.
But there is that guy.
Yeah,
he's there. Yeah, it's too bad he couldn't just have Art Bell be in there.
He was on my mind when I was writing that stuff. You know, I'm an old Art Bell fan, so he's always in there somewhere when I'm theorizing.
Right. Well, it's like you can always like touring musicians. They all spend a lot of time like listening
Yeah.
to coast driving at night, and it's funny because like they all like it's interesting to see which ones picked up on the
Yeah.
conspiracy theories and which ones don't, but they all know all of them. But yeah, Jeremy, the loop was really good. I definitely think the strength or the hinge of the book is the characters, and that's something that you can be
Thanks,
really
man.
proud of. And like, I mean, all the Jeremy Johnson, like, you know, parasite, paranoia, freakazoid stuff
Yeah.
is there. It's all there. But what's I think really good to me, or what's really great for me about this book is that I think you're so good at that stuff. You've gotten so good at that stuff that it's awesome to see you conquer new aspects of storytelling and meld it together with your style in a way, you know, because you're right. Like Skullcrack City, as good as it is, it has one character that we know we get to learn very
Yeah.
well, but and Doyle is very fully realized, but even the minor characters like Brewer, for example, and in the loop are very, you know, fully realized and great characters and good work for that. Is there anything like as far as just the writing of the book that maybe you haven't gotten to talk about yet that you you know that you're really proud of, something that came out of this process that you felt like you nailed that was new for you to close this out that you can impart to other writers?
Yeah. Man, just that I got it done. You know, this was a book that you know, in a weird way, that my agent was waiting on since 2005 when she signed me. You know, talk about a patient person waiting for me to come around. It took me 12 years to get something done and in front of her. So just persevering.
Oh,
You
so
know?
she waited like we did for Skullcrack City, right?
Yeah,
So
it's always a wait with me. It's always like a 5-year wait between books.
that reminds me, the one question I teased that I didn't get
Hmm.
to, working with an editor this time. Let's talk about the process of working with an editor and then we'll close up shop.
So Joe Monte was a very intuitive editor. I would say I did 4 different edits. The first one was significant. And it was 9,000 words different from the draft. You know, the draft I got to him was probably my 3rd or 4th draft. And then, so we probably finished on an 8th draft, which is crazy. But it was an extensive editorial process. And he really understood what made the book tick. And what was interesting is he actually pushed me to strengthen the conspiracy elements. I was trying to make it very much a subjective experience of Lucy's. And so a lot of the conspiracy stuff got ramped up during the editorial process. And some of the violence too. We actually had a couple, just because of the content of the book, you know, passed it through a couple sensitivity readers, you know, to say, hey, are there issues we should be concerned about with Jeremy's portrayal of the narrator, with this voice, with the content? And one of the funniest things that happened is one of the readers got back to us and said, you know, I think he's done a wonderful job of portraying a female character in this, but where he failed was the moment the outbreak happens, all of the violent antagonists become male. And she said, as far as I know, this isn't an all-boys school or an all-boys city, but the violence becomes all-boy. And I realized, and my editor even realized, we both had that bias. We saw violence as like inherently male. And she was like, you know, if you change it and you have more female antagonists too, it will feel more shocking to people, and that sense of wrongness will come through in a stronger way. And so it was the first time I'd have someone directly confront a bias I didn't even know existed in my mind, and strengthen the work by making me aware of it. So that was, you know, another part of the editorial process I never got to experience before, and it was awesome, you know. So shout out to the crew at Simon & Schuster. They know what they're doing. I'm much happier with the book we put out than the one that I sent to them, you know.
Well, yeah, and yeah, it turned out great. And wow, I didn't realize you'd been your agent had been sticking with you since 2005 for
Yes,
this
you
one.
saw a lot of weird books, man. So patient.
Well, it paid off, and the book is really good. Jeremy, at some point I'm gonna have to rope you in for. Eventually, I want to do a serious Prince of Darkness
Yes,
tribute episode.
I'm there.
And
I am there. It's having a thing right now. I don't know if you've looked around the internet lately. People are starting to appreciate that film. People are starting to put it where it belongs in his top 5. You know.
have I talked to you since I went to the screening in the church where
I
it was
saw
filmed?
pictures, and somebody told me the church and the basement are in different spaces. Though, is that true?
No, they're in the same space. But the weirdest thing was just, especially like walking in the alley, where the bike stabbing and the where they jump down, and then was up, like being in that alley was like one of the weirdest things for me. And so the screening that they did of Prince of Darkness was in the actual room where they set up the equipment.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
Yeah, and so they put a screen up, and you had to walk up these stairs, and then the room where they had set up all the equipment. And it's funny because they put up a picture on the screen, and then they like pointed to a part in the where you could see in the picture from the movie, like, you know, like this part of the wall that was like kind of stuck out, and you're just like, I am in that room. That is. Yeah, I think that's as close to a religious experience that I could have at a church. But yeah, it was. I did think of you several times during the evening, and you know,
I would have flipped out for that, man. I've seen other people's pictures and stuff too, and I just think to myself, man, I just, if I would have had the money for a flight, that's a long way. But
well, yeah, thankfully it was like only a 3-hour drive each way for us, but down here, but it was truly an insane experience. But I still think the movie needs more credit. You're right, people are jumping onto it. It's weird, the whole thing of like, but I still don't get people, the Renaissance for Halloween 3. I don't understand, because
not the same thing.
Yeah,
but it's where's the Renaissance for Night of the Creeps? You know, it's like nobody talks about Night of the Creeps enough. That is a funny, weird, excellent movie.
Isn't Shane Black one of the writers?
Yeah. And
Fred Decker is his writing title.
Yeah. So yeah.
So maybe
that should be up next. We can. I mean, okay. The Halloween 3 thing is just part of a broader conversation, right? Like. But Night of the Creeps is a standalone, and so that is another one I'd like to see get its due. Just saying.
Well, what I think is going on with Halloween 3 is we're old enough to remember being disappointed in Halloween 3, whereas the younger people, like I have this argument with Trevino all the time, because he's like, "You're wrong. Halloween 3 is amazing," and I'm like, "No, you don't understand. We were disappointed, so we fucking hate that movie. But you're younger, so you like it."
The psychological build-up's all different. It's like going to see. I went to see a midnight showing of Crystal Skull. Like, you can't, you know.
Yeah.
There's times where you go to stuff and what you're expecting it to be because of all these like huge experiences in your youth, and then when it's not that, when it's disheartening like that, it's tougher to appreciate it, right?
Well, when I took my dad to see Crystal Skull like 2 weeks after it came out, and I saw it opening night, and I realized that when I saw it in an audience that was all senior citizens but me, like all the jokes worked. Like that, it worked for the seniors, and I was like, wow, this movie works for this audience. It's amazing.
I'm glad it found its people, because it wasn't me.
It wasn't me either.
Yeah.
But yeah. But anyways, Jeremy, it was awesome talking to you. We'll at some point we'll do the Prince of Darkness panel in the next year or so. But I definitely appreciated the loop, and can't wait to see what you got cooking next. Are you already working on something?
I'm working on college courses right now. I'm my son's fourth grade teacher, and I'm getting ready to take another statistics course. I'm just trying to scrap my way back up to a degree. So
I can't wait.
I have some ideas to dive back in on. Yeah, my statistics papers to be released.
The statistics horror.
No, I'm working on my next thing is kind of about like a well, I don't want to spoil it, but it's like a global, it's about the way we use economics as a form of terrorism, and about a guy who is traveling in another country and representing this kind of shady third party, economics group that's doing the bidding of the 1%, and him encountering something that he didn't expect in a foreign place, and kind of, so a little bit of cabal action to it. Anyway, well, it's a whole thing.
Hey, it sounds like William Gibson. I can't wait till it gets marketed
Right.
as Stranger Things.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no way by the time I actually finish another novel, people will be saying Stranger Things, right? Like, there's no way.
It'll be something.
Not with that season 3.
All right, Jeremy, it was great talking to you, and
Likewise, man.
And everybody read The Loop again. Go out if you everybody here has listened to or read The Loop, so go read Skullcrack City if they haven't.
Yeah.
So.
Good luck finding it.
All right, Jeremy, it's great talking.
All right, man.